Hello, hello, hello. Crafty Chris here for another Your Scraps Thursday night. Tonight we're going to be working on a July calendar page. Yes, it is a week early this time, not my usual week late. I can't believe I got it all together to do it in advance. So my video audio is gone, and so I'm overdubbing my voice. So what I've done is I've decided to take my little itty bitty scraps and I'm going to use them up. And I want to use them up in a July calendar page, which also is going to be in reds and in whites. So this is how I store my pieces of paper. So I have my red package in here, and I'm just checking through to see if there's any other reds I might want to use. There's also shapes pre-cut in there. So I'm going to stick with the reds that I have in that little package. And I'm going to go now look at my whites. Now my whites are generally whites with blacks or whites with just a little bit of color. I tend to sort my papers with whatever the prevailing color is, so the one that I see the most of. So in here, there probably won't be much in the way of variety in whites. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to intermix the reds and the whites together. And I'm thinking about doing something across the top that's sort of like has a center point. So goes from the center into a V point, and all the colors come off that. And it's going to align to the top edge. And so I've taken some really crummy cardstock. It's very, very thin. And I am going to cut it down the size of the top of that calendar page. And then I'll do all the gluing on top of that piece of paper. So it's easier because I cannot cut off strips to make it absolutely straight like a cut line would be. So now I'm going to measure, because you always should measure a couple of times before you cut, because this paper I know is often off. And I think my measurement is 5/16. So I'm going to actually cut my paper at 5 3/8 to, or sorry, 3 3/8 to make sure that I have a little extra I can trim back in the final cut. So I'm just lining it up right now at 3 3/8 to fit that spot. Hang on to your paper because you will need it again. Okay, so just dry fitting this, I'm noticing that I'm a bit short on either side because the paper was not 12 by 12 exactly. So I am going to make sure that when I'm cutting, I cut my long sides first and I leave my short sides so that I can cut just a little bit beyond what the white paper shows. So when I'm placing my pieces, I'm going to make sure that they are a bit longer on the sides. I'm also going to do the same technique on the sides of the calendar and across the bottom. Okay, so in order to do this, I think my best process, because I want that center to be centered, is to fold the paper in half. So I've got the paper folded in half, and that will be my determining center point for doing both sides. I'll do each side separately. So once I've got everything lined up, then I can trim the top and bottom and make sure that right-hand side is long enough to add that little bit in. And I want all my pieces to match in the center so I would be able to cut the center to keep it all straight. So I have a number of different kinds of red paper. I've got red and white, red, different kinds of red. So it's kind of a good idea to sort out things a little bit. Look for the sizes that are going to fit the page. It's always good to do a little bit of a dry run to make sure your strips are going to go from top to bottom and not leave a little gap. And also, it's not a bad idea to keep those short pieces to the side as well, because there are either end at the top and at the bottom, you'll have shorter pieces, so you can use those short pieces at that time. Now I've decided that I want my angle to be about 2 inches from the top and right at the corner at the bottom left to create my V. So again, I'm in the bottom left corner up to 2 inches across the top to create that angle. You'll see in a moment. So now I'm just pulling papers to figure out things that will work in terms of length. I'm putting quite a few of the shorter ones away, which is fine, but I should keep some of the shorter ones, you'll see shortly, in a little pile on the right hand side, because I figure out there will be opportunities to use that. And here I'm showing you what I mean by being too short. If it doesn't start at the bottom point and go well past the top point, it's not going to be able to be cut right to the edge. So I'm noticing that some of these pieces are not going to be my primary pieces, but they certainly can be put in a pile for the shorter sides. And I'm dry fitting to see if I put them on the top of the line or the bottom of the line, if that will make any difference, but it really doesn't help me any. So back to sorting, and some of the shorter pieces you've noticed that I'm now moving to the right hand pile because I can use them, but just in where shorter pieces are necessary. So I'm just going to fast forward this section because I think I do this for a few minutes. So I'm pointing out that I'm trying to keep things on the red and the white, and as much as possible, so the red and the green doesn't really work into that plan, because I am focusing on this being the Canada Day month, and our traditional colors are red and white. I will have some colors in coming up that are a little more of an orangey red. Some will have flowers on them, some will have white pattern, and that's fine. Just trying to limit it to the reds and the whites as much as possible. All right, so now I'm putting away things that I'm not going to be using. So just taking those last little bits of pieces that look like they might be long enough and getting my smaller pieces put back into the baggie, and then they'll go back into the box when I'm done, because there may be some leftover pieces in the end. And then we'll do this whole process again with white. So, and this is the white pile, and again, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of variety in the color in the white. There might be a few dots or something, very spaced out dots that might have color on them, some black and white patterning, but mostly I'm trying to stick to as plain a white as possible. I do like the wood grains and the brick and the one that looks like a woven sweater. It has a texture to it, so I'm okay with that. But patterning, I'm trying to really limit, like those ones that I'm pulling out that are very black and white or gray and white are likely not going to be used. But just in case, you never know. Sometimes they kind of find their way in there. So again, I'm just sorting these according to size and to usability. Okay, so I'm putting those away, getting ready to do the first V. Okay, so now I have my angle ready, and I am going to be positioning the pieces in the very bottom corner along the top of my strip of paper so that the 2" is also on the top of my strip of paper. I'm going to stick down the paper so it doesn't move because I want to do a dry layout of this to make sure that I have enough paper and that I can play around with it a little bit in order to change the look. So I'm just lining up my strips so that I can stick it down so it'll be my sort of point of reference while I'm pulling colors together. So basically I'm just going through, and my plan is to do whites and reds and whites and reds and whites and reds, but it depends on the red. And here I'm playing against a stripe which has an equal balance of white to red. And I'm also noticing I'm really trying to use those small strips, but it's just not working. So now I'm going to switch into maybe using a white next to the red and white piece, trying to find one that is long enough. There we go. That one fits in perfectly. And now I'm going to be looking for something that is red that is not going to be too short. That one actually fits in. And I'm just going, and as you can see, I'm trying to compare it again to use those short little strips, and it's just not happening. So I'm moving all those over. There we go. Now I've got some of my larger pieces and my smaller pieces. And, you know, it's a very small amount that it's off, so some of them may fit, but I'll have to try them out at the time. So now with having just chosen a red, a darker red, I think I'm going to go back to the white section and pull in another white piece. And it's not really, and then red again, so red and white again, and red. So it's not really, the white pieces are really sort of just to break the red a little bit. And just making sure that all of my pieces are going from top to bottom when I use them. And now I can pull in those smaller pieces, as you can see, because the space now doesn't go from the very bottom to top. I'm able to pull in some of those shorter pieces to use them up as well. So thinking that I need to put some white in there, going to some of the short white pieces, and then pulling in that red again. And now I'm kind of looking at it and thinking to myself, well, maybe I can go from dark to light in color, in the red colorways, in order to give it some sort of a gradation rather than just mamby-pamby. So this is me trying to sort the colors a little bit more so that they're dark to light. And I'm finding that that stripe piece is just not playing the game. So I'm thinking about moving that stripe piece. And that's what's happening right now. And I'm liking better what I see with that red, that solid dark red being my piece that kind of anchors the top. Sticking that down, and we're just going to lay these out again and make sure I like what I see. There we go. Starting to look a little bit more gradated. And now before I get to that sort of orangey red color, I feel like I need something to transition between the dark reds I have there and the lighter reddy colors. So I thought that that dark red stripe would go in at this point. Again, you have to kind of lay it down to really see if it's what you want to have happening. And I'm going to stick a little more white on that end. And then I decide that that white would serve better, having some white, and I think I choose glitter. I've chosen the glitter paper to go in there, and then I have the red flowers and the gingham. Well, it's not really gingham, sorry, it's more of a weave. And now I'm just being fussy about how things are going in terms of what's going where. So once you've got the underside done, then it's time to sort of play around with whatever you have available for your upper side. I still need a little bit of a longer piece up at that top edge. And it has to make sure that it goes bottom and top. There's some more of that wood grain. And I was going to put some of that red, but now I think I'm going to use the back side of the white hearts. As I said, it's really just a matter of playing it all out and getting it to the point where you like it. And the other way you can do it is just random, whatever comes into your head at the time. That would work as well. So, looking at that last piece of gingham, and I think I've decided that I like what I see. So now it's time to stick it all down. So in order to stick it down, I'm moving everything out of my way because I need to take what's above that red anchor piece and what's below the red anchor piece in order, so that when I glue it back on the page, I know where it's supposed to go. So now I'm going to permanently adhere the red one down on the paper. And I'm starting from that little corner tip and going right up to the 2 and gluing below the 2. Or yeah, below the 2, so below my space. So the top, or the left side of that paper now, is touching the corner in the bottom left and touching my 2-inch dot at the top of the page. And now I'm just going in and I'm lining all of my other paper up with the bottom. So when you're lining it up, it is the upper edge that has to cover the paper. Otherwise, if you use the bottom edge, you'll have a gap. So I'm lining the top edge of that paper at the bottom. So just finishing up the bottom here, and now I'm going to move to the top section. And I'm going to turn this upside down because I prefer to glue, because I'm right-handed, I prefer to glue from the right-hand side. So I had to also turn my pieces upside down so I make sure they get in the right order. All right, just put in that last little piece there to finish off this page. So that's 1/2 of everything done. So that's basically what it looks like. And I need to cut down the center to clean up the edge there, because when I do the other half, it won't open if the 2 edges are touching. Now I bring out my cutter to cut this edge, and then while I'm doing it, I realize that I could potentially cut right through my fold line. And so I changed my mind and I decided to just use my scissors to cut down there. And hopefully I'm using my long scissors because it is a longer cut, and trying to make sure that I get right at that edge but without cutting the fold. And once I've got that edge cut, then it makes cutting the sides much easier as well. And so now I get my bigger cutter out because I want to be able to trim right along that bottom edge, because that's the edge that's going to go where the days of the week is, and I can't really trim it once it's taped down. So I'm going to line up the top and the bottom and make sure I'm just cutting off the little tails. And as you can see, they're clearly cut off. I'm leaving the end for later because the end is where I have to leave a little bit extra. So now I'm looking at how I'm going to lay out the next section. And I need to put in my 2-inch point. But before I do that, I decided that I'm going to cut off my top edge. And I have some difficulty figuring out which way I'm going to do that and how I'm going to do that, because it doesn't really cooperate with the directionality of my my cutter. So in the end, I decide to fold it in half and make sure that everything lines up. And I'm not as concerned about this edge, so I cut it about a 1/16 of an inch longer than it needs to be, because that's the top edge that's going to get trimmed off anyway. But for me to be able to do the cut for the end and make sure that it's accurate, I need to have those pieces cut off because they would get in the way. So now I am going to start on the other side. And I'm going to heap some of those longer pieces just in case I can squeeze them in at the beginning or at the end. Maybe even match the first couple of pieces if possible, but it looks like I don't really have enough from these pieces that it is going to work out. And also the direction of the angle of the piece makes a difference as well, whether or not how it's been cut is going to fit in. So I realized that there are going to be different papers on this side, and that's fine. I didn't expect it to be symmetrical in every way. So I've just found myself a similar color to create that V as what's on the right hand side, and that's going to be my anchor for the left hand side. And I'm going to repeat the process, so I pin everything down. And I have to remember that I'm putting it under the line, not above the line. Otherwise it would look a little bit wonky. So even though the left piece is larger than the right piece, it still gives you a visual V because they both are in the same point at the bottom and the same distance from the center at the top. So now I'm going to try to replicate something similar above the line to match that center. Making sure I have enough paper. And I think I have a little piece of that gingham that I can stick in there. So I was quite happy because it does look very similar in that V now. That V looks like an anchor point. And I'm saying a bunch of things with my hands, but really I'm telling you exactly what you need to know. So now I'm looking for my next piece to go beside that V. And again, I'm doing this before gluing because this is a very large area of pattern and I'd like it to be at least sort of planned and a little bit more thought out. Where I don't have exactly the same pieces of paper, I'm trying to find paper that is similar. It's either similar in width or similar in color, or if you were to change this all to black and white, similar in the amount of color that there is, so that it kind of balances on both sides of the pages, even though they may not be the exact same papers. Okay, so I like what I see. Everything is balancing okay, and I have enough paper on everything, so I'm pushing things off to the side so I can get everything laid out. And I just realized that I pushed off the left-hand side papers before aligning them properly. So now I'm going to have to put them back in place. So while doing that, I kind of am looking at it and I'm thinking that I don't really like the way it's organized. So I try messing around with it a little bit more. Separate two colors that are a little too similar. And I feel like that's a better choice. So it's, in a way, even though I had to redo it, it's a good thing I did. And now I push them off the side properly so I don't lose the order in which they're supposed to be on. And now I'm going to glue down my V piece. And again, I'm just doing little, I've got quick dry glue. And the thing about quick dry glue is that it dries quickly. So here I'm making sure that the upper point, so that would be the right hand corner, matches the center of the V, and that the left hand corner drops below the V so that everything will line up and there won't be any gaps. And now I'm just going to basically whip through doing what I did the last time. And I'm just tucking that final little piece in and we'll be done for this side. Just want to make sure it's all tucked in properly. Okay, so now taking my big scissors and I'm going to cut down the center so that I don't chop off that fold in the chopper. And now I can see that it needs a bit more of a trim because it's not folding quite flat. So that means I just need to go back in and carefully adjust that slightly. And now it sits flat, no problem. And you can see that center V. So now, getting my chopper out because I want to chop the side of the paper, and it's going to take me a little bit to figure out which side I can chop, because the paper doesn't fit in properly. So I end up trying it both ways. Can't find a good way to get it cut. So I am going to trim off the ends first. And I have to remember that I need to keep my ends slightly bigger. It turns out that I'm 3/16 of an inch short, 12 inches. So that puts me adding 1.5/16 to each end in order for it to actually cover a 12 by 12 page. So I think what happened here is I decided that I wouldn't cut the edges until I cut the tops and the bottoms. So I folded the paper in half and am lining everything up and making that cut. And that is the bottom cut. And it sort of snags in the printer, so I just go in with my scissors and trim that cleanly. And now we have a nice clean line that's going to go over top of the days of the week. And now I can do my cutting because it's nice and straight. I can do my cutting on the ends, adding that 1.5/16 to each side. It's a crazy little amount, but when you put it on the 12 by 12 page, it really shows up. So it's much better. If I had done things going up and vertical or horizontal, it may not be as big a deal, but because everything is going diagonally, a horizontal or a vertical line would really show. So I'm just trimming that right to the edge, making sure I don't, or right to 1.5/16. And now I can turn the whole thing over and measure my 12 inches, and it will all work out even. And there we go, making sure everything ends up 12 inches and making my slice. So now my ends are done and the bottom is done, and I just need to finish off the top. And I'm noticing I've got little areas once I did my end cuts that don't have paper in them. So I'm going to have to go back and fix those up a little bit. This is where your scraps come in handy. So now I'm just going to trim up that top edge so I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Get all those little bitty bits off. And now I have to repair the two little bitty holes that I have on either end. So I need a little piece in the bottom right corner. So I'm just going to find a piece of paper that matches that and line it all up and glue it down. And I don't need a big piece, so I'm just going to steal it from one of the other pieces. And basically what I'm doing is I'm aligning the pattern on the strip of paper with the pattern that's on my banner. And because there's so much pattern on this banner, you won't notice that it's been touched up, excuse me, because it's just a little tiny corner. The focus will be central where that V is. And there I go. I have that corner done. Making sure the glue's off because it's such a little piece. And now I'm going to trim it off. That's the thing about quick drying glue, is that it dries quick enough that you can go right in and trim it off. So there's that corner repaired, and I'm going to do the other corner similarly. So a quick trim, and there is the finished piece. All right, so now we're ready to glue this down onto our calendar page. We want to make sure that the actual V ends up in the center of the page. And because we've done the measurement, it should fit exact from one side to the other side. And we're just going to use regular adhesive to stick it to the top of the calendar page. And I'm probably using more adhesive than I normally do because it's a bit heavy. I had some pieces of sort of hairs of paper that weren't trimmed properly, so I just fixed that up. And now we're ready to line it up. So I'm going to line this up with the edge of the days of the week and one end, because I know I'm going to be trimming the top. So I don't want to try to line up the top because it will go over the days of the week. So because there is one more final trim to the bottom, I line up with the days of the week and one side. And there it is. And it looks very nice. Very happy with that. So now we need to work on the sides. And again, we have to measure our sides. And one of the things I think I want to do at this point is to alternate the patterns. So where the left-hand side is going from top left to bottom right, I think the sides, I'm going to have it going from top right to bottom left, just to give some variety and a little bit of like a stopping point for your eye. So measuring the paper is super important. I know with this particular pack of calendar pages, my measurements are all over the place. So I think my measurement was 3/4 of an inch. So I ended up measuring 3/16 of an inch instead. So we've got a little bit of play there just in case. So I did 2 at 3/16 of an inch, or 13/16 of an inch. And of course your paper is going to be different depending on what calendar pages you use. But always cut a little more than you need just to make sure that you can trim off any excess and you don't run into troubles. So now I've got my 2 pages. I'm going to take my calendar page, and I'm wanting to sort of start at the top and go in the opposite direction. And I can do these both at the same time. And what the benefit of doing them both at the same time is I get sort of a similar pattern on each side. I don't have to do much thinking about it. So at this point, I'm sort of thinking to myself, can I just glue on one side, cut it down, and then shift it up to the other side? And will I have enough? And when I kind of eyeball it, I realize that doing that kind of measuring, I'm not going to have enough of the same piece of paper to put it on the other side because there will be two opposing angles. So even though the longer side of the trapezoid is going to work, the shorter side of the trapezoid won't. So my first quick and easy thing to do here is I could do measuring, but rather than measure, I am just going to take two pieces of paper, and I have to find another piece that's similar there, and long enough. There we go. And I want to copy the angle. So I've put my paper on the opposite side of the right-hand side, and I'm seeing whether that angle that's already existing on the paper is going to help me in any way. And what I'm finding out is that the angles really are not helpful because the papers are too short. So I'm just playing around to make sure I have it in the center, and the angle on this one is pretty close. So I am going to glue this down right away. So as I've said, I've lined the left side of this piece up with the center of the fold line on the banner, and I am putting some glue in so that I can line up a piece to replicate that angle on the right side of the paper. So rather than measuring it, I can just copy it. And there we go. Okay, so that's one done. And now I'm going to do a similar process with the other side. So again, I know I have a piece of paper that's going to fit, and I'm lining up with the center point and on top of there we go. So this will give us our V when they're put together. So we cheated a little by not having to do any measuring, and now I'm just finding paper that's going to fit that little space at the top. Now the process for doing this is exactly the same as what we did on the top. It's really got to do with kind of matching as closely as you can either side. And not necessarily worrying about the size of the paper, but just that the overall balance of the colors and the lights to dark kind of match. Now, what's happened here is I've realized that my pieces are longer than I need them, so I've gone back in to measure the exact distance I need. I think it was 8.5, if I'm not mistaken, and I decided to cut 8 3/4 just to have some play. So I'm going to stick this in, and because there's only one piece of paper on it, as long as I keep it flush to the top, and I'm trying to figure out if that's a good idea or not at this point. As long as I keep it flush to the top where there is no paper, my cut will be fine. And you'll notice that I'm measuring at 9 3/4, and I will figure that out in a moment. So this one is at 8 3/4. So this one is accurate. And then I'll think to myself, wait, the little ends I cut off are different. And I realize it's because this is 9 3/4 instead of 8 3/4. So I'm going to adjust, and there we go. So we have our two 8 3/4 inch papers. All right, so as I was saying, the process to this now is just simply to fill in the sections all the way down, making sure that your bottom corners are at the bottom corners of the paper touching that that paper line, the horizontal or vertical paper line. So I'm just going to flip through this really quickly because it's basically the same as what you've already seen. Okay, so I am trimming here because there is a piece of paper that I'm cutting off that is big enough to go on the other side, so I can actually match that paper from one side to the other side. So that is why I stopped to cut it. Otherwise, I would not have stopped to cut it. I would have just built all the way down to the bottom. Now this is the part where those little tiny pieces that you've been keeping to the side come in very handy because you have such a little amount of space that you need to cover. You can use some of those little offcuts. And on this particular piece, I think that my final piece fit perfectly. It was a little piece of glitter paper, and it actually fit perfectly, but let's finish off both sides to the same point. And I'm just making sure that that will fit in. And I'm looking for a piece of paper I think I thought I had, and it's probably there, but it's probably buried. There we go. So I found something that I can put in there. I didn't want it to necessarily be something that had already been on that side. And so now I have two little corners. And I pick up my little piece of glitter paper and it is perfect. And that happens sometimes, not very often, but sometimes. It literally did not need any trimming. And there we go. So that little guy goes there, and I tried to find a little bit for the other side. And there we go. Okay, so both my pieces now are, my side pieces are finished. And I get my cutter out, and I am going to trim off the ends because they are getting in the way, and I need an end in order to trim the sides. So I need a straight end to trim the sides. Carefully lining up, making sure that I don't cut beyond the paper. There. Now this piece I'm cutting off because it's a little tricky, and this piece I didn't want to cut it straight because it would have I would have lost a fair bit of the paper, and I can use that paper again. So I just cut inside both of those. They're still attached, but once I put them into the cutter, then I can cut them on a straight cut, which will save me paper. So as you see, that piece kind of just flops over the edge on the right side of the blade, and I'm gonna line everything up here. Carefully lining up. There we go. And everything gets cut off nicely. And then we do the same thing to the other side. And that's basically how you finish your piece. There you go. Okay, so we still need to do the other side, and we're going to whip through that very quickly. Okay, and so now we have our two pieces together. They look similar, but not exactly the same. I'm going to bring our calendar page back in, but we're going to smoosh everything out of the way. All right, so now we have a calendar page. And remember I said I did not want them going in the same direction. So I started off with putting them in the same direction and then realized that I had done that, so I switched it back. And now the angles are going opposite to what's happening in the front, which I think is rather cool. And I decided that I wanted to have the little glittery bits at the top, and when I did that, it shifted my angles without me kind of paying attention, so that now all the angles are going in the same direction. So if you're repeating this and you'd like to try something a little different, then switch the angles, but I've ended up accidentally getting the angles all going in the same direction, which was not what I intended, but it still looks good. So here I'm just putting your standard adhesive on. Don't need a lot. Sticking it down by lining it up to the top and the edge of the actual calendar, the inside of the calendar, because we know we're going to probably have to trim off on either side. So now we're going to do that trimming. So we're taking the excess off of the sides that we knew we would have, lining up our edges of our pages to make sure that they cut properly. And we're doing that all three sides. And then we will work on our bottom of the page. One more side. And here I kind of, in the video, was alluding to keeping your cutting blade clean, because if you get adhesive stuck to it, it can be the cause of not getting a clean cut. So you noticed a couple of times throughout the video that I had to take my scissors to trim after cutting, like here. this little bit stuck because there was glue, adhesive stuck to my blade, and I didn't see it and clear it, and so it didn't make a clean cut. It wasn't a problem. I just went back in and trimmed it up so that it was nice and tidy. But you want to keep your blades as clean as you possibly can, especially if you're cutting things that have adhesive on them. All right. And there's me trying to get little bits of adhesive off the blade so that I don't have that problem again. And there's one stubborn little bit there. I generally use hand sanitizer that has no fragrance or no aloe, just straight hand sanitizer to clean the blade after I've done some cutting with adhesive. Alrighty. So now we need to do our bottom piece, and I'm just getting rid of some of the bits. And I think the comment that I made in the video while I was recording it was that some of those little bits may come in handy, but you know what? We've got plenty of red pieces of paper, so it should be okay. So again, we do that measuring thing. And I know that the bottom of this is always off. So I think I measured it to this measurement was 3/4 of an inch, and so I ended up cutting the paper just a little bit bigger at 13/16 of an inch, so I could just trim it back and make a nice clean edge. All right, so now we need to make our base, our bottom, and in that we had our center point folded in, we want our centers to line up again. So we folded the little bottom strip, or I folded the little bottom strip. And now I have to create that angle again, like I did, but now I have to create it in sort of what will end up being a V, as opposed to just a diagonal, as I did on the sides. So I simply just took my paper, lined it up, glued it down along that angle. Once you've done something once, it becomes quite easy. Oh, had a little trouble with the glue there. Getting locked up. And lining up that center fold with the center on the page. Just adding a bit of glue. Making sure I do not go over the line. There we go. And making sure my paper fits all the way to the bottom and the top with some leftover. And now I need to do the same thing, but I'm going to trim this off because I think I can use the same paper. So I'm lining it up in the center again, and I'm going to see if I can use that little piece I just cut off. And no, doesn't work. So I need to try something else. So I'm looking through my pieces trying to find something that is big enough to use as the other side. And I found myself a little piece of plaid. I think that is black and white plaid. And I'm going to glue it down on that space. Making sure I have enough hanging over. And there we go. And there's my V, and I'm all ready to go. So I'm going to approach this very much the same way as I approached the banner at the top, except that I am not going to take as much time worrying about what fits in and doesn't fit in. So I'm not going to be doing a dry run. I'm going to be just gluing immediately onto the paper. So there's our first half done. And I think that in order to make the other side easier, I have an awful lot of excess paper there. And so I thought I would trim some of that off so that I could use that excess paper on the other side. And I put it in and line it up very carefully. Sometimes you have to be super careful because with wet glue, the paper can stretch. I got all these little bits now, and now that's nice and straight. I want to go in and do the same thing, but again, I want to make sure everything is lined up. And I do have to trim off that one piece, because if I cut it the way I want to cut it, I'm going to lose paper. So I trim off the top edge in order to be able to trim the rest. Lining it up very carefully. And there we go. So some of those pieces I'm hoping I'll be able to use on the other side. So here's me pulling the papers and trying to figure out what ones may or may not be usable. And I'm just going to open this up and sort of dry run a little bit with the little bits and pieces of paper that I have, kind of trying to keep a similar look from left to right. And I know that there will be many pieces that I will not have that will work. But I will pull those out of my other part of the stash. So now I'm just putting the last piece in, and I'm adjusting everything to make sure that it is actually, when it's glued down, is going to actually fit on the paper, and I'm not going to end up with a little problem at the end with something missing. So I managed to get rid of a fair number of little scrappy bits, which is awesome because that means I have larger bits for something else. So now I've just moved it off, keeping it in the same order, and now I'm going to go in and glue it as I usually do. Just fitting that last little piece in there. And putting my glue lid back in, and now I'm going to trim this down the same way that I did last time, taking that tip off so I have a flat surface and trying to make sure that I can cut everything as close as possible with the trimmer. All right, so that is our bottom piece. Just double checking it to make sure it looks like it's all still stuck together. Shoving my scraps out of the way. And now it's time to put it on the bottom of the page. And I'm just adding in some glue. And I wonder if you can tell me right now what mistake I made. So now here's me putting it under, or over rather, lining it up across the bottom with the bottom of the grid. Oh, and what do I notice? I notice that I trimmed off the ends of the piece without adding in that extra 1.5 sixteenths. So I decided to lift up the bottoms of the sides, easiest way to fix the problem, and I'm going to insert the bottom piece under the sides, still lining it up with the bottom of the grid, because there's no way to put paper back once you've cut it off, especially that little bit amount. And now I'm taking my center and lining it up. I happen to have a little hole on the bottom of the actual calendar page, so I'm making sure that my fold line is lined up, centered in that hole, and then of course lining it up along the grid so that it is completely aligned with the top. And flattening it all down. And we do need to trim that bottom piece. So again, pulling out the trimmer and taking off the bottom piece. Just making sure everything's working together. Yep, good to go. Now it's going to take a little punch to get through because there was some extra stuff, and I do think I have that problem where I need to trim just a little bit. Yep, because the sticky on my blade is a bit rough. There we go. And there we are, done. So now what we need to do is put the title on, and this is the month of July. So I have a couple of options in terms of letters. I have red letters I can use, which you've seen me use before. And I have sort of like wood grain, white wood grain letters. And my third choice is white letters, and they're quite large. I really like those white letters. So I'm going to see what looks good on the paper. So the J kind of gets lost. It's very difficult to see. It's a bit small. Let's see how the wood grain looks. Excuse me. I think it's kind of lost as well. And let's see how the white looks. And it gets lost as well. So I am gonna just choose the letter that I like the most, which is the white letters. And I think I'm gonna have to put it on some background paper. And that will pop it up from the background. So because there's so much pattern happening there, I think that it would be difficult. So I'm going to take those off, put them back on their pieces, and we are going to get some background paper. Now, the other thing you need to consider is whether or not you have enough letters to do the title that you want to do. So always make sure that you check that. Now, I have a piece of black paper, and I'm wondering if I do the black, if that is going to work as a base, but I think it might be too heavy, even if I tighten it up. Yeah, I don't like the black. It's too stark a difference. So I think I need to come up with another color. So let me just put the black away. And we are going to pull out something that matches a little better. So I have this plaid. I haven't used it on the page at all, but it's kind of a combination of the darker red and the orangier red. And so I'm going to stick my letters on there. I'm going to give it about a 1/2 inch of a border all the way around. I will have to trim the paper down. I'm following, normally I would use a letter guide, so that's my little ruler that I stick the adhesive letters on and then pop them off. But I'm going to do it because this has a grid on it already. I'm just going to follow the grid and put each of the letters on right onto the paper by using the lines in the plaid, and making sure that I have a decent distance between each letter so that it lines up and it looks nice. And these letters are nice because they are larger than what I usually use, and so they're great for titles. So just the Y. Whoops, I hit my camera there. Sorry about that. Woo. All right, so back to putting my Y on. There we go. And pushing it down nicely. So now I just need to sort of trim this out a little bit. Put my letters away. So I kind of want to keep a 1/2 inch at the bottom, a 1/2 inch at the side, and a 1/2 inch at the top. Now keep in mind that these are scraps already to begin with, so I'm not that concerned about wasting paper because, you know, I tend to hang on to my paper anyway. Let me see here. So I am going to take and make that 1/2 inch at the bottom. And that little strip of paper, because it's unique, I'm going to keep. And again, I'm going to do the same thing at the other side. And these are pieces that will go in my under 1 inch thick strips. I'm having a little trouble eyeballing that. There we go. Okay, there's another strip that will go in that container. And now a 1/2 inch from the Y. It's funny when you're on camera, it's kind of hard to see things because you're not right over top of your tools. I have a tendency to stand when I do things, and so when I'm seated to avoid being under the camera, it's a little bit of a challenge. All right, so there we are. So, perfect size, love it. And I think I might want to do something with the corners. So I'm going to get out my corner rounders. So I have 2 different corner rounders. They each have 3 different ends. And I just kind of line it up and think to myself, would I like to see my piece looking like that at the end? Because they have little images on them. And I think I made a decision. I'm going to have the one that has little bumps on it. And hopefully my letters aren't going to get in the way of me clicking through. Perfect. It's a good choice. I like it very much. Oops. Oh, those little pieces hard to get off my desktop and my calendar page. And I've got the ridge on the paper, so I can't pick it up. All right. Now I think I'm going to do a line around the outside edge. And I'm going to do it in white. The pen that I'm going to use is the Gelly Roll, and it's the Gelly Roll number 8 size. And I'm going to use a ruler, and I'm just going to make straight lines with a ruler. You've seen me do a lot of freehand ruler lines, or freehand lines, but this time I'm going to do a ruler line. You also have to make sure your jelly pens are pre-started before you start your work, otherwise you end up with a bit of a mess, because sometimes they get chunky stuff stuck to them. And I'm putting dots in the corners where I want to line up my lines, and I'm doing it all by sight. I'm not being very particular about it being measured. And I think at this point I kind of accidentally touched one of the little dots that I made and it wasn't quite dry, so, but that's all right. Moving on. And now to do the lines, you want to go over it more than once. You want to go a couple of times. So I just went up and down a couple of times to create my lines. All right, so there is a little bit of a fuzziness on there, but it doesn't really show that much. And I like the idea of centering this nice large title. So I'm going to wave it a bit and just make sure the ink is dry. It dries very quickly. And I am going to stick it down. The letters are kind of popped up anyway, so I don't think I'm going to pop dot it, but I am going to put some adhesive on the background. And I have letters already on it, so the putting of adhesive is a bit tricky. You've got to make sure you don't bend your paper over your letters and create a crease. So just being very careful. I was originally going to line it up for the center of the vertical and center of the horizontal, but then I decided to drop it down a little bit towards the days of the month, which I think is a little more dynamic. So it's not quite centered vertically, but it is horizontally. Really love the way that turned out. Now, the next thing to do is to put the numbers in. So I grabbed a couple of pens and I wanted to make sure that I had some colors that match what was going on, and obviously you can't use white because you're on a white background. So I have two reds that I'm going to test to see if I like them. So one is a pinkier red, one is an orangier red. I'm also going to probably use black because that's kind of a neutral color. And I think I'm going to use an orangey color because there are some flowers and things in the pattern that show a little bit of an orangey yellow center to them. So that's a natural color to use at this point. So now first I got to test my reds to see which one I like. The first one looks pretty good. And the second one, oh no, no, no. The second one is very pinky purpley. So we're going to stick with the first one. Now, the way I do my counting is I start with the first day, pick a color, and then I count every third day. So I write on every third day. So if I put the first on the first square there, and then I 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. And this is when I realized that this month has 5 weeks, but it's actually a spanning 6. So I have to figure out when I put the next color in exactly how I'm going to divide up the Sunday, Monday of that same week to add in the last 2 days of July. So it's practice, regular calendar practice, to put those extra days on the end of the month, not added into the beginning of the month. And I wanted to put Happy Canada Day across that top. So I decided to divide diagonally the bottom squares, the Sunday and the Monday, because that's what the days will be. And I'm going to put the numbers in that way. So 29, 30, and 31 is, I'm going to finish with the red. All right. So then my next step is to go to the next box after that number 1 box, and then just after every number I'm going to do yellow, and then once I've done all the yellow, after every yellow I'm going to do black, and I'm just following the number sequence. Okay, so that's all the numbers done. Now I'm going to put Happy Canada in there, and I have some smaller red letters that I'm going to use for that. Okay, so the letters I am using, I'm comparing 2 different colors. There's a dark and a light, and I think I like the darker better because it will show up nicely on the white background and kind of stand out a bit from the kinds of reds that are going on in the background. I always purchase 2 sets of letters because I find I use up more with 2 sets of letters than I do with just 1 set of letters. I tend to have a whole bunch of things left over. I'm also using my line aligning tool, and you want to make sure you have the right side up on your aligning tool, because if you use the back side, the ink can get stuck to your stickers and come off, and so the whole measurement aspect of it will disappear. So basically I am, like I said, using the right side so that my stickers don't come off, or the stickers don't pull off the grid on the back. And from the front, I'm now going to align the stickers. And the stickers just get put on the line that is visible on the ruler, and as straight as I can make them, and with a little bit of space in between. So I'm putting on my last letter, and now I can put this on the page and align it on the page. So initially I was going to divide the page into thirds, and the piece was 1.5 inches tall, so that left a 1/2 inch as for each third. So I marked off those 1/2 inches for each third. So now that the thirds were marked off, I put my ruler up to the calendar page, and I realized that I could actually fit the entire title into the entire page, like the number of squares. So rather than kind of shift them, I thought I'll just put them central in the blocks and central vertically as well. So I just quickly erased my lines and then went back to completing my title on the title grid. So once I had my title ready to go, then it was time to center it and put it on the grid. So I just did this by eyeballing and tried to keep enough space on either side of the title and not include that last square because that was the first day of July. And I wanted to have, at some point I was going to put some things on either side of the title as decorative elements. And now to push it down, you just tapped it all down, the top edge, all the way along. And then I just turned it sideways, and because it's such a long title, I used my ruler to put pressure on the stuff that was pushed down, and I just tilted up and snapped the letters off and then just patted them down afterwards. And was looking at it, and I really didn't like the way the D looked, so I thought I would adjust the D and tried with my finger. It was too hard to get off. Tried with a little spatula thingy, and then tried with a pokey tool, and I was able to sort of manipulate it and get it where I wanted. And that's kind of how you have to play the game, especially with the small letters, because they're not as obviously out of line until you get them on the paper. And then you kind of realize what's going on there. All right, so then I am happy. So now I have my calendar page complete, except for the decorations that I'm going to add afterwards. So you will have seen the decorations that I added in because you will have seen the beginning of this video. And at this point, I hadn't decided what those things would be. But the picture on the front of the video is what ended up being put in there. And so that's our finished page. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. If you like this video, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe and like below the video. And we will see you next Thursday. Goodbye.